right, let's get started. Welcome to the March work session. Let's see here. Open up. All right, first thing on the agenda is comments from our student representative. Welcome again.
Last Friday, the high school student council hosted Mr. Great Valley, and the event went super well, and we're thankful for everyone who helped to make it happen. The show was really entertaining, and Mark Neary won Mr. Congeniality, and Tyler Beauclair was crowned Mr. Great Valley. During indoor track, Brett Zatland placed 5th in the state for the 800-meter event and qualified for and went to nationals last weekend and is the new athlete of the month. The music department trip to Florida was a success, and they returned to school last Monday. And everyone seemed to have a good time and enjoyed the sunshine before they came back to all the snow. Also, the Danish exchange students are arriving tonight and will be staying with their hosts for the next 9 days, and we all look forward to meeting them and seeing them around school tomorrow.
All right. Whoop, thank you. All right. Do we have an IU report?
We have an IU report. Yes, we do. On February the 21st, the IU met at the Downingtown facility. It was a long day, started at 5 p.m. for pictures for all of the CCIU board members so they can publish their information. We had a new board orientation followed by phenomenal dinner, an executive session of the board, as well as a public meeting of the board. We gained a lot of great information that I'd like to just share a little bit of the highlight with you. The CCIU is a huge initiative. Lots of programs, there's lots of things going on. It's an amazing environment, very energized staff. They do a lot of great things. I will tell you that they are in their budget process also. They have committed to budget within the Act 1 index, which means everything will go up. And Great Valley did not approve this budget, if you remember, last year. So they are calling to not have any change to the county school contributions. However, there's nothing that's listed that really isn't slated to go up. We do not budget that way in Great Valley. I had an unbelievable amount of questions. I think I've heightened the awareness of the other 11 sitting at the table. We have some work that we need them to do to this budget because there are some things, for instance, I have some concerns because there's an overlap between our paying as districts. We're actually paying for core subjects that we teach in our own districts. So there are things that we are paying for in our 1/12 of that budget that make them competitors. So there are a lot of things like that that I have questions on, as did some of the other board members sitting at the table that night. Basically, when the CCIU started, they were there to handle vocational technical needs and special ed programs for districts. There's a lot of other things that are under their umbrella that we are contributing to pay for as 1/12 participant in the budgets. So I know we're in budget time here. We only meet once a month on that board. I've reached out to our business manager. I have a perfect understanding of what's going on, but we have a lot of work to do before I think we can even take a look at considering voting or not voting on that budget. So I'd like to bring these specific things back to you as they roll out for me, so that by the time we have to vote on this budget, we all have an understanding of what the problems are before we say yes or no. And that's it.
All right, when do we approve that budget? Do you know, Chuck? When's that? In April, okay. Good. All right, thank you. Yeah, Jen just dialed in, so she's listening to the meeting. Sorry, she couldn't make it in person tonight, so she is online now. All right, next thing up is program and special ed.
Dr. Wexler, as you recall, when we had spoken about special education, and it was requested that Dr. Wexler give an overview of special education, and she and her team have also been working on the special education plan. So before we get into the Pupil Services Department and the budgetary updates, to draw to your attention that the special education plan, which is due to move forward, and it needs to be, this will not be voted on next week, because it needs to be available for public comment for 28 days prior to the vote. So it will be voted on in April. And I just want to publicly thank Dr. Wexler and her team for the amazing work they've done in putting together the plan, and all the work they've done up till with the programs that we have that are not really embellished in the plan, but truly doing an amazing job.
Good evening, thank you. Tonight we will go through our Pupil Services Department updates, sort of a general update on where we are with compliance, our special education plan, and then some ideas and efforts around cost containment. So we've reviewed this slide publicly with the board, and we've mostly focused, we focused on, I think, overall enrollment growth, number of retirements, and then we've looked at students with specialized services. Since the purpose of this presentation is primarily around students with IEPs, I've sort of brought this down specifically to the students that are receiving special education services, just to sort of see the trend over the past few years. We are currently at 766 students with IEPs. That's a real-time number pulled not yesterday, it was Sunday, on Friday. So typically we'll probably, as you can see, last year we hit close to 800. We'll probably go close to 800 by the end of the year. We have several permissions coming in as we speak, and kids will be identified. So this highlights the increase that we've seen. As I go through the presentation, I will highlight that one of the things that we have seen in the past, particularly last year and some prior years, is students moving into the district with IEPs. So last year, our enrollment increased, and when we looked at the number of IEP students moving in with services, it was at about 20% of the students that moved in required special education. We are required to implement the IEP in a timely fashion. So that was something that we didn't have a lot of control over. The other thing that we're closely watching is our identification rates, because we are, as Dr. Speaker Polovinsky has mentioned, we are needing to put in a pre-referral or a referral system into place district-wide to help manage some of this growth. We are sitting at close to 18% identified, which, as you know, is higher than some other districts and higher than the state average.
Quick question.
Sure.
So your statement there about higher than other districts on an average number, and then these are growing. These standards, just lack of a better word, but the criteria, I guess, for when a student is identified or not is something that's set by the state and the law, right? It's not, we don't have a different standard than another district, therefore we have a higher percentage of kids. Is that correct?
Correct. There is the specific learning disability category, and students with other health impairment are one that we are watching, and there is research, which I talk about later, that when you have strong general education supports, it can decrease the need for special education in those types of areas. Other disabilities, such as autism, intellectual disability, those tend to be very, very clearly defined. So when you're looking at students with mild learning or attentional needs, What we want to work on is trying to service them in the least restrictive environment, which could entail receiving services prior to having to move to an IEP. So that's the work that's in place now, but it needs to continue to be improved upon. So yes, I mean, the one thing from my experience is working in other districts, I've seen a better pre-referral system, so we have work to do.
I just want to draw attention to one of the numbers under enrollment. The 4,145 for the 17-18 is taken from day 3 enrollment. Oh, right. So when you look at your enrollment report, as of 3/1/2018, you'll see our current enrollment is 4,190, and that is growing pretty much every day, every school day. Dale Garrison is, as doing kindergarten registration, also having new students come in, and as Dr. Wexler had shared, 20% of those that come in typically have had plans in place that we then are obligated to implement.
Thank you.
Joanne, a quick question. That number, the 766, does that include 504
That
services?
does not. This is only IEP.
Ps, and that's not gifted either.
Correct. This is just special education, IEPs.
But
Now, some
special ed-
students may be duly identified, and then if they are, they do fall under the IEP number for special education because that trumps the gifted part.
But 504 service agreements also require the services of the school psychologist for screening
Correct.
and everything, correct? So that's another
Yes.
strain on that
The system.
cohort of school psychologists.
Correct, yes, thank you.
Joanna, I just want to go back to Dave's question, because I want to make sure that I heard this correctly. So I believe Dave's question was, we don't have more children in this category because we're doing anything more than what
We're
the
doing what's
state
required,
says.
correct.
Okay, that's what, okay, I just want to
Right,
make
right,
sure.
and there is a provision that allows you to provide general education interventions for a finite period of time that's closely monitored before you enter into an evaluation. So, and that, quite frankly, helps you if the district is ever cited on what they call disproportionality, which we're also closely monitoring. So if you have a subgroup, let's say students who receive English language services that might become over-identified for special education, we will be required to go back and show the intervention plans that were put into place before we had to utilize special education. So it's something that is, it's required and it's best practice for students. So we don't want to give IEPs to students that don't necessarily have to have them. But there will be students who may go through that referral process and get some general education interventions, and perhaps after 6 to 8 weeks, then need to move toward an evaluation to say, those general ed supports aren't quite meeting the mark, they need more. We're just, right now, what's been in place in Great Valley since I've arrived is that the request goes automatically to the psychologist. There hasn't been a great mechanism in place to try interventions for students. The exception would be reading. We've done a lot of reading support interventions, primarily at the elementary level, but we've been lacking on behavioral intervention. So I talk about that a little bit later to kind of show what we've changed in our staffing structures to put more of that in place this year. So, am I good? Okay. When we talk about budget revenue sources and gaps, as we've highlighted in the past, most of our funding is coming from the local tax source, and the IDEA, the funding that is supposed to come for IDEA from the federal government has been lacking, and it's right now sitting at about 16%. We do get some support through medical access billing, so students who have been approved for medical assistance, we can bill for some reimbursement on certain services, but the amount of money that we're getting back on medical access is actually decreasing, and our contingency funds is when we have students who are in a very high category of funding need because their services are so specialized, we can apply to the state for some relief on that. And we do that, and we get some money back for those students. For an example, when I arrived here, we had 3 students that we could apply for contingency funds who generally their funding was more than $76,000 per year. The third year, we went from 3 to 9 in that category. Completely unpredictable. Students moved in with extraordinary need. And that can equate to anywhere from $500,000 to $700,000 that was unaccounted for. And I think I've explained that to the board before. There's just, and as Mr. Linderman has explained, there's a lot of variability to our budget because we never know what could be moving in, what the students' needs could be when they enter the district. So this is just a slide, and this has been shared, I think, through the Chester County IU superintendent's meetings. This is sort of highlights where we are with the federal funding of the IDEA mandates. So it doesn't seem to be really improving for us. So we are looking at, maintaining compliance, having quality program for students, but also being obviously fiscally responsible about how we're moving forward with that.
Joanna, are those funding levels consistent school district to school district, or does that 16 represent Great
Right.
Valleys?
That's consistent with all, right, with all, yes.
And I think as you look up there, it was when IDEA first, when the federal government first came out in Congress, had, it wasn't set as a maximum target for their contribution to be 40%. That was the stated target, was 40%. As you can see, they have never reached the target, and it does not appear as though they're going to anytime soon. So the target of their contribution was at 40%, that they would contribute 40% of the special education costs.
On this, on the form, 2009, is it high that year because of the stimulus money? Is that why? Thank you.
But back to Amy's question, I mean, every school district gets 16%,
Yes.
regardless of economics of the district.
Do the lawmakers at all state where the shortfall should be made up from? It's sort of like, we as lawmakers are going to mandate this level of service, but we're not going to fund it? Is that like my understanding what's happening pretty clearly? Okay.
And as we've shared in other presentations, I believe, this area of southeastern Pennsylvania is highly litigious as well. So the threshold for what's not only required, but what parents demand from our districts is high. So that is a factor as well for sort of where we're situated. And if you look at our attorneys share sort of maps with us around where is the litigation concentrated, and it's right where we are. So that is a reality for us as well. So this, as you've seen on your board agenda, we have provided a draft copy of our plan, the special education plan, which is going to highlight what we are mandated to do and how we're going to get there over the next 3 years. It is a requirement that we have to submit every 3 years to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Once it's reviewed tonight, our goal would be to post that for public comment and then bring it back for voting in April. The way we went about this was we formed a large committee. I believe we had maybe 25 to 28 people there. We combined pupil services and special education staff. We included parents. We had administrators, general education, special education teachers, psychologists, counselors. We had a pretty broad range of people. And in our department, when we started to improve communication district-wide, we began distributing surveys to parents and families at the conclusion of their annual IEP meetings. So what we did was we pulled all of our survey data that we had accumulated over the past 2 years. We redacted any personal information, and we put people into groups to review the threads and the themes that we saw for special education in our district. We also looked at what we've been on an improvement plan / corrective action for the past 3 years, actually for several years in Great Valley, and any need for new programs, and just in general through the survey data, what do we want to highlight as our strengths programmatically and things that we need to work on. So in our plan, you will see, and I've come to the board in previous meetings in previous years, and we've asked for additional teachers. We asked for a multiple disability support teacher, I believe last year or the year before, I'm getting my years a little confused. We've asked for an additional high school autistic support teacher. So there have been things that we've come to you for approval as part of the prior plan, and the goal was to make sure that we had a full continuum of services in the district. So we are happy to say at this point, we do not see the need to add new programs in the district. We feel that we're adequately providing a good continuum for our students. And when you see some of our Penn data, I think that shows where we are with the least restrictive environment provisions that we're required to implement. Our strengths and needs, which came mostly from our survey data, many of our families receiving IEPs were quite complimentary and said that the strengths of the district, the themes we saw were collaboration and relationships. They feel a good sense of trust with the administration and with the special ed teaching staff. They feel supported. They feel that the professional development we're providing to parents through our council that we've formed, a parent committee, is actually helpful to them, and the quality of the special education program that the students are receiving, many of them have expressed. So the themes that emerged, whether those were our strengths. Areas of need for us, the big thing was communication, which I know comes up as a thread often, and some of our families said they felt that they were getting a lot of information from special education staff, but not necessarily from the students' team as a whole. So I think that's something that we can take back to our building administration and say, you know, these are things that are coming through in themes that we do need to work on, because just because a student has an IEP doesn't mean that the special ed teacher has to own the entire program for that student. We are no longer on corrective action for least restrictive environment as of 2 weeks ago. So we want to maintain that. We're really proud of that work. It took us about 3.5 years to get there, but we don't want to lose where we are. We don't want to lose ground. And we also need to watch the identification rates, which I explained before, as our overall percentage of students eligible and students that fall into that other health impairment category, which is typically attention and behavioral concerns that make them referred for an IEP, that sort of drive that. I share this is our Penn data report. It's always a year behind of our submitted child count, and it is usually released in the beginning of the summer. It is publicly posted for consumption, and so I like to just put it out there that this is what exists for us publicly right now. The two bars in the front graph talk about our itinerant service support, so that's students that are spending about 80% of their day in general education. And the bars on the two sections on the end of it are students in other settings outside the district. What happened to us was we were sort of disproportionate in those two areas over several years. So we were not servicing enough students at the itinerant level and tending to place students out of district too frequently. So when we started this work 3.5 years ago, our itinerant numbers were at 50%. In the Penn data that's posted publicly, you can see that we're at about 59%. And as of March 2018, which is actually based on our recent 12-1 count that PDE asked us to submit so that they could take another look at it, we've gone up to 65% of our students are serviced at the itinerant level, and our out-of-district numbers are sitting at about 4% as opposed to 6%, which is sort of that's where we started. So I just want to highlight that we are very appreciative of the board's support in helping us establish that continuum. It's been really a shared effort with all departments and all the administration in the district, and we just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of, we don't want to lose where we were. Because, you know, that's PDE's comment to us was, yes, you are officially released, but you need to continue to watch it, as we always do. I won't get into the details of all the different things that were put into place, but if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer those when we're done. Our identification rates for other health impairment did go down from 25% of our students with IEPs to 19%. So again, what we've done is this year at the elementary level, we have put behavior analysts on the pre-referral teams, and they are working with students before they're referred to special education. So I think in some respects that's helping. And we've just been more cognizant of making sure that if we go to that route for a student, that it is absolutely required that they need the IEP.
Joanna, if I might for one moment. So the early intervention efforts, or any of the intervention efforts that we do, are basically from the standpoint of children that are already in our system that we are identifying as maybe having some type of a learning difficulty. So we identify it with intervention. But our number being so high, am I understanding that that's because we are seeked out, and I mean, we have been for quite a while, we are seeked out because of the integrity of our special education programs. So,
Right.
So am I right to say that the problem, well, I don't see it as a problem. I think that it's a wonderful thing that our program is that good that people want to seek us out. It does create some budgetary difficulties, but this board is up to the task. We'll work it out. So I'm happy about that. But I guess in my mind, I just want to make sure that I'm certain. So the reason that our number, our percentile of children with IEPs is higher than our neighbors is basically because they're coming to us already with IEPs in place, as opposed to we don't have a rash of kids within our system now that all need IEPs, or am I wrong?
Like I said, when I started, I think it's twofold. I think it's the move-in situation that has increased pretty substantially over the past 1 to 2 years. And I also think there's a part of it that's lack of pre-referral. I really strongly believe that we can look at what we're doing a little bit more closely before we're going right to an IEP. Like I said before, we are monitoring very closely our English language learners' representation in special education, because that could become a problem for us, and we don't want to have to be on corrective action for that issue, and it will come back to what was your pre-referral system. In Lower Merion, where I was before, we usually sat at about 16%, but the same thing, we were sought out by other districts. We had a very strong pre-referral system. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I talk to a lot of directors, and we all kind of say the same thing, like, everybody wants to come to us. So, I think there is a part of that people believe that their district is really sort of doing the best job at it. I will say that we've experienced probably in the past 2 to 3 years that yes, we are getting sought out more by realtors. People are, it's definitely increased from at least from 4 years ago, where we're seeing a little bit more of a desire to land here with very active discussions prior to them even becoming residents. Our autistic support programs are known to be very, very strong, so I know that that is something that comes up pretty frequently, and those students do have very intensive needs that are usually cost intensive as well. So again, I don't want to make it, I think there's a couple variables at play, and the comment was made to me by PDE that you don't want to get much closer to 20%. It does trigger questions. So that's why I'm saying this is the time to intervene before we have a problem with it, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
So some of the issues that we've brought to light that I know are creating some budgetary questions is aid support. When we first presented to the board from our cyclical monitoring, when we went on an improvement plan for least restrictive environment, LRE, one of the first things we said was, we feel as though we need some additional program aid support at the building level to support the kids when they're in general ed. That will help us be more inclusive. We've done that in pockets, but we believe we could do a better job with it, and we want to take a very focused look at certain parts of the organization where we could better utilize instructional aid support instead of a highly clinical one-to-one personal care aid model. Unfortunately, as it's been explained, we have to do that slowly, and I think in focused areas, which I talk about in a subsequent slide or two. So I will get to that. The education teacher support is very, very important to stay in compliance with this. So we collaborate very closely with the Department of Teaching and Learning. Our teachers now are jointly in professional development, special ed, and general education, so that everybody's on the same page about how to service students in the least restrictive environment with proper differentiation. So that needs to continue. There's also a lot of supervision that goes into this. So our building administration, from a their standpoint when they're sitting in IEP meetings. And our supervisors are very intimately involved with what's happening in the buildings to make sure that we're not sliding back into where we were. We're also looking at the related services. So like I mentioned before, we've made an effort last year to increase behavioral supports, which is a service that supports students in the general education environment or special education, but we're looking at it more from an inclusive standpoint. And our speech therapists are also being utilized to push in to students to support them or to be part of that pre-referral team. And as we've discussed in the past, we've had to move all students who need speech services to an IEP. So that also probably drove our numbers up a little, a bit this year, because we had students who were serviced in a different manner who are now serviced on IEPs as part of corrective action. So again, it's just trying to stay where we are. We're in a good place and we don't want to lose that momentum, which correlates to the staffing request that we will be putting forward. So again, in terms of the compliance piece being high quality programming and in a cost-effective manner, just saw a typo on my programming, we want to look at the effective utilization of aid support. So where appropriate, we will look to replace personal care aides with instructional aid support. The first place we are planning to attack is the middle school. That is part of our plan. We have one building aide for the middle school. We have a program aide that special education has put into place to support the emotional support program, but that's 2 adults to aid support for the building. But we have over 20 one-to-ones. We think we can do a better job with that, but it's a matter of sitting down with all the kids' records. The CCI clinical supervisor is going to be supporting that work. They've already offered to do classroom observations, and this is at no expense to us, by the way, even though I know their cost is high. But we are all in agreement. The IU and Great Valley are in agreement that not every student needs that high level of clinical support. It's not needed. There will be kids who do, but we feel fairly confident there are some who can be serviced through the instructional aid model. But it's a matter of making sure that it's decreasing that need for the one-to-one and being careful that we're just not violating any needs in the IEP. So it will take us a little bit of time, but the work is already going. The IU has let us know that they are struggling to find aides for other districts, so if they don't work for Great Valley, there will be other places. So it's not, I want to be clear that it's not for them to make a profit from us, it's truly to help us with the model to get to where we want to be. They've done an aid analysis for us, and we've been working really closely on it. It's just, we need to get some momentum, and we're at that point. It will support LRE as well, so we feel that that is a better model for kids. They don't rely on one adult all the time. The other thing we're looking at is when students transition from early intervention, we would like to make sure that our primary special education teachers have programmatic aid support. They do not necessarily across the board right now, so that if a student needs adult assistance coming in from early intervention, they can access that without having to have a one-on-one. So that's where we think we can hit it hard over the next probably 3 to 6 months. And I think it's a start rather than trying to go through the K-12 system all at once, because, and then as students move into high school, the idea would be that they wouldn't necessarily rely upon the one-to-one structure. The costs of PCAs are higher than that of instructional aides as well. In terms of staffing projections, we are, again, as I mentioned before, we have asked for the 1.0 school psychologist, and we've also discussed the possibility of it being a coordinator of services. So, as I've mentioned before, we are contracting out to stay in compliance with evaluation and reevaluation timelines. But this position would also help us with the oversight of that referral process and evaluation process. I am providing a lot of that now, but there is more work to be done, so we are asking that could that person perhaps that would be hired have some evaluation responsibilities, but also be available to lead that work and also support the Section 504 compliance happening at all buildings K through 12. The autistic support teacher is one that we tried to work with existing staff this year, but we will not be successful for next year due to the number of students transitioning from early intervention and the fact that we have kids that need the 3 to 5 program. We cap it at 8. So we, as I share later, we tried to work internally, but it will not work next year. And the last one is our speech and language pathologist, which would be to maintain compliance with the corrective action that was in place previously and to also help support our programs and any initiatives around least restrictive environment, LRE.
I just want to clarify, when Dr. Wexler had shared about caseload compliance, that is not Great Valley dictated. That is dictated by the guidelines, our legal requirements. So based upon the level of service that the child is entitled to through the plan, there are a number of students that are allowed to be on a teacher's caseload, and actually it goes right down to the physical environment of the classroom and square footage. It's a very exact science, so it's not something that it's based on anything with Great Valley class size guidelines.
So we haven't had the opportunity to talk about this, so I thought this would be a good time to show what we've tried to do to work with our existing resources. We have 2 teachers at Katie Markley that support a K through 2 autistic support, very intensive classroom, and a 3 to 5 classroom. We did close the classroom due to lack of enrollment for 3 to 5, and we shifted that teacher to provide itinerant services at the other 2 buildings who were bursting with some caseload concerns. And those are students with mild needs, but are mostly fully included. As I mentioned before, unfortunately, we can't use that one teacher at Katie Markley to sustain the incoming early intervention and the kids that are still in the program. So that is what we are proposing, what we've tried, but where we stand is that we feel we need to reopen that class. We have removed IU staff that were providing mental health support to our students, and we have reassigned that support to our existing Great Valley social workers. They are being written into IEPs, and they are part of students' programming. So that was a cost containment effort on our part last year. In terms of gifted caseloads, which is outside of special education, but part of the picture, we are now using our librarians to support gifted caseloads at one of our buildings, and that may continue in other buildings depending on our needs next year. They are certified and they've been trained to work with our students that have those needs, so we are trying to maximize those efforts at the elementary level.
Joanna, I just have a question. How are the parents responding to that? Do they feel like they're getting the same? It sounds like they are getting the same level, but what's the parents' reaction to that?
We sent out a
concerned?
communication, and I received one email, so I followed up and observed and went back, talked back with the dad, and everything seems to be okay. There was just questions about change.
Okay.
Because the students are actually meeting in the library for a book club, they really like that. So it's sort of, it actually has ended up working out well, but it was a small, we're talking about maybe 12, I think it was about 12 students this year.
I just want to take one moment also to reinforce the fact that this was done very strategically. This was not just randomly selecting 12 students to be reassigned to a caseload. It was looking at which students their GIEP was specifically aligned to areas of literacy and reading, and it made sense to use that enrichment time with in the area of literacy. So this was very strategically done, and I want to thank Dr. Wexler and the Tricia Beck for working very closely with Dr. O'Toole's help. I mean, this was very strategically done with the gifted teachers. It was certainly not a random selection of students.
Right. Caseload caps for gifted are 65, so we've had pockets where it has exceeded that with one teacher.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Real quick though, for some people that are watching this on TV down the road, it's not a stereotypical librarian like some people might be thinking.
Correct,
these
certified
people-
teacher.
These are certified teachers.
Exactly,
Right,
yes.
so I want to make sure that everybody's
We've
clear on
taught, I
that.
believe, various grade levels, so yes,
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
recognize that.
I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that
He's-
matter. It's not just,
Yes,
I mean, not to
thank you.
diminish what a librarian does, but they are
Right.
certified teachers also, so.
Yes, absolutely.
Joanne, I'm sorry, I know you haven't gotten to the last point yet, but just a quick question. In the second bullet and the fourth bullet, are those services that are already duplicated through the IU that we are paying for with our contract to the IU?
For the Attend program?
The
are you-
attend and the mental health support?
Oh, yes. We were we were paying per person to be in the district.
Are we still paying? Is that part of our contract?
We're not paying that any longer because they're not here. Like, we
Okay.
were billed for that individual for the course of the year at a very high rate. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's not a consortium. I believe what Mrs. Ravenfeld, it's not part of the consortium fee. That was an additional
Additional.
service that we're not
Yeah.
accessing.
In coming into Great Valley, that was one of the things that caught my attention. And then the CCIU Attend program, which we were paying about $30,000 a year, which includes an intensive psych evaluation and then putting services into a student home for attendance problems. It really is a program, again, like when we talk about personal carries and this highly clinical model, it's a program that's reserved for students who, it's like sort of a last resort intervention. There had been a sort of a practice here to use that very frequently for students, and we've looked to pull that back. We have three social workers in the district who are actively involved in home visits, attendance interventions, writing plans, and that's what we focused on. So that's not a huge savings to the district, but we felt it was things that we could do internally that we didn't need to have that for every student who wasn't coming to school. So, so I guess I think I just want to make sure I am closing. We, in looking at how to sort of wrap this up all together, as I've mentioned before, for keeping quality programs, doing what's right for students, providing support, whether it be IEP or general education, we want to focus in on that pre-referral system. I've kind of outlined what it looks like. There are weekly meetings at the elementary level that occur. That is a multidisciplinary problem-solving meeting. I've sat in some of them. There's usually 10 adults around the table of all different disciplines coming together about 2 hours a week and really focusing on student concerns. The general education teacher comes into the meeting, and there is a collaborative problem solving that occurs with goal setting that is monitored for usually about 6 weeks. So we are getting there at the elementary level, but that is new this year. And there was, I know in a previous meeting, there were questions about the difference between social workers and school psychologists. So this doesn't necessarily flow with the previous slides, but I wanted to put it there in case that was helpful or if there were additional questions. There is a little bit of overlap, but there are things that usually the school psychologist is engaged in that's very tied to the IEP compliance process and 504 as well. We are trying to get our psychologists attending IEP meetings very regularly, not necessarily required, but parents like to see them in the meeting, so we have tried to put that into the responsibilities, knowing that they have a lot of evaluations to conduct as well. Our social workers are spending a lot of time on attendance, as I've mentioned before, truancy proceedings and support for students who are chronically absent. In terms of threat assessment with students who are actively threatening to hurt themselves or others, that is usually where our social workers are intimately involved with doing those assessments in tandem with a school counselor or with a school psychologist. So they're also sitting on pre-referral teams. So I don't know if there's any questions about that, but those are some of the main distinctions. So closing, final slide. Just want to highlight that, as I've said before, I think it's great for the district that we're not on this improvement plan any longer, but it needs to continue to be watched very closely, and we all believe it's a shared ownership. So it's general ed, it's special ed, it's our building administration, and all of us in the district own that, that compliance. So we want to prevent it happening in the future. So those are really the main points, is having a really robust referral and evaluation system, close administrative supervision of the processes that are in place that are mandated, maximizing student support in the gen ed environment, which is the bulk of that is how we're using our aides. And then, of course, as I referenced, the ongoing professional development of our general ed staff to be able to support the needs of our students.
Joanne?
Yes.
Quick question. Hats off to you and congratulations for getting us out of the watch list. But I have a quick question. Looking at the state budget and the proposed special education funding, in the county, we're the second lowest, 1.5.03 projected for next year. The only one that's a little bit lower than us would be Octorara. Is that based on student population as a whole? What is that when I look at Westchester getting 5.1 million for special ed and Avon Grove getting 2.6, Downingtown getting 5.5? What is the formula there for the state support of that?
I'm not sure what you are referencing, but, okay.
As in most state budgets, it's a relic of about 25 years ago when it was high, and then they just decided that everybody would get this base amount and you'd all be frozen at it, and you'd get a minuscule increase depending on your wealth. They give you very little, so we're stuck in a realm of, 200 kids being special ed from the 80s or 90s, whatever. Same thing with basic ed. If you look at that, it's the same thing. We're the lowest or second lowest in the county because it's not really related. When they got away from the equalized subsidy for basic education, which had a kind of a dollar amount that they would set, and it would be based on your number of kids and your market value and things like that. It kind of drove out a more truer one. They got away from that, and in the typical politics, it just got like, okay, we'll freeze everybody, we'll hold them harmless. That's the big thing. So even schools who shouldn't be held harmless because their enrollment is dropping, they get held harmless. But schools that are going up in special ed, you would think we would get a lot more money because of our special ed increase. It has nothing to do with the number of special ed kids. The only thing that has anything to do with special ed kids is our contingency money, which even that's dwindling. It's a pot of not very many $1 million to be divvied up by 501 school districts based on need, and they have to all be in that high category of 50 to over 50 or 75,000.
Usually get maybe 150,000 back
yeah.
total.
Joanne, I didn't mean to blindside that with you.
No,
I
no, no
apologize.
worries.
I
That's
apologize if I
fine.
did.
No,
But
no.
is there any way we can have a dialogue with there has, I'm on it. Yeah, but that has, that's absolutely ridiculous. If the need is increasing and the state funding is not there to support us and it's taking from other programs, it's absolutely, completely cattywampus, and it's got to change some way or another. And thank you for everything you do.
Sure.
And this issue of funding and contribution of federal and state entity is really paramount with the superintendents. When the legislative breakfast, I know that every year I've gone for the last 8 years, that is a hot topic, special education funding. And every year, I believe we hear, oh, I did not know that. And that's unbelievable. And every year, yes. So you're right, absolutely.
So Joanna, I just want to roll this back one more time. So basically, in the superintendent's budget are some employees, additional employees within your realm that will, so the target is to reduce our costs, A, by having a program that can provide something better that will be cheaper than the PCAs. So we may be able to reduce some of the PCAs. So part of this initiative for your department this year is to bolster up all of these programs that will ultimately reduce our costs as much as we possibly can. But the reality really is the mandates. If these children come to us with PCAs, we can try all day long to change that, but if the team doesn't agree, we're not making those changes.
And I think what we've really been cautious about is what type of support does the student need and when? Because we have students that we've gone to that one-to-one route because we haven't had the building aid support in certain places to provide that, looking to be fiscally responsible on aid across the district. And we recognize that there are other ways to do it that don't require that level of clinical care. So it's just trying to understand better what that student actually needs and when, because there is, I think for many of our students that have one-to-ones, there is often some downtime that we've had administrators, could we use them differently? And once they're in an IEP as a one-to-one, they are assigned to that student. So we've seen it, we know that there are different ways that we can do it. So it's not that we want to, I just want to be careful that we're not looking to cut support from students, it's just being more deliberate and sort of investing in a system that will promote what we need rather than reacting by assigning one-to-ones, if that makes sense.
And you're actually enhancing the product of what you're giving them than settling for what that PCA could provide.
Right, and students usually, especially as they hit middle school, they don't really want a one-to-one. We've seen that too. So, and in some of our specialized programs, we don't need to have more adults than kids in the room. So we've been able to really minimize that in some of our more specialized programs where the students are not quite included as much, looking to shared responsibilities, and that has been effective. So we feel confident that we can take it the next step further.
Can I ask a follow-up question, kind of, for the students with the 20 PCAs? Are there situations where these students are going to college with? I imagine that it's very few.
These are students, when we reviewed the list last week with Andrea Dinsmore, who wasn't able to make it, her son is ill, but a good portion of those students have emotional and behavioral needs, and they're included in the gen ed environment. So it's not like we're talking about students with extreme self-care types of needs. They're kids where there's needs for prompts and redirection, and we are relying on one-on-ones for that. And
if these students do then progress on to
they would not
college,
have a one-to-one.
they would not have a one-to-one.
Right.
Okay,
right.
I just want to make sure I understand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, Mrs. Gunderson, that's exactly why we're looking at this, to maximize the transition. Absolutely.
Sure.
So I feel like our job is to prepare people for the future and not to rip out supports where it's needed, but instead to make sure that when folks do get to college, that they can succeed because they know that they can do it, or they've developed those skills through trial and effort and sometimes hard work, like a lot of times hard work, making mistakes. So I think it'll be painful, but I would love for kids to have the option to enter college and be better able to succeed.
Mm-hmm. If that's okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for all the information, and thanks for all your team has done you and your team have done to get us out of non-compliance. And I know all the other stuff you do, it's very painful at times and lots of lost sleep. So again, thank you, and make sure your whole team,
Thank you.
two of you and the rest of them, all the rest of them that aren't here, understand that we appreciate it, so.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Next is the ESL camp proposal with Delaware County Community College, and this is being paid out of our Title III funds. This is a summer program for our students. Title III is actually a component of the federal programs budget that is aligned to our English language learners. Following is the distracted driver student survey, and that is a survey that will be given to students. There is also an assembly that will follow at the high school April 3rd in the evening. More to come on that, I know, Dr. Capitolo, April 3rd, and much more will be happening around that effort at the high school and high school administration is working to close all those loose ends on that presentation.
Regina, I just have a quick question. Is that a survey has been given in the past, or is it new?
I believe this is the first year that this survey is going to be used, and the idea is to find out how to align the presentation most with our population.
I read it. It sounds
Really
like a great
use our
survey. I was
context.
curious if we had
Yes.
past history. Thank you.
All right, the monthly enrollment report is there for review, and then policy.
Okay. We had a policy committee meeting on March 6th at 7:30 in the morning. The policies that were discussed were policy 337, vacation for administrative staff. No changes were suggested for this policy. Language is linked to the administrative compensation plan. Policy 537, vacation for classified staff, was discussed. Classified staff follow an electronic process for requesting vacation time off. A separate guidelines document was created for this policy. The first paragraph under vacation credit of the guidelines was stricken as accrual of vacation time is outlined in the applicable staff handbook. Policy 338, 438, sabbatical leave for restoration of health for administrative and professional staff. The policy refers to leave for medical reasons. Medical documentation must be submitted with the sabbatical leave request. Language in the policy is directed by school code. No changes are suggested. Policies 338.1, 438.1, compensated professional leaves for administrative and professional staff. This policy is defined as leave for educational purposes and is in accordance with applicable law. There are specific dates for submission of required application materials. Approved applicants also must complete a certain number of professional development credits according to the amount of leave requested. No major changes are requested for this policy. And one of the things that the policy committee did discuss was timing on these. So for example, the more notice that we have, the better, because it makes it easier to align with marking periods and such. So, but obviously if someone gets a health diagnosis and they need off then so there's different rules for planned versus unplanned, but we've tried to be consistent and fair throughout. Okay, policy 428, salary determination by professional staff. The salary schedule for professional staff is in accordance with the provisions outlined in the collective bargaining agreement and is approved by the board. Policy 528, wage and salary determination for classified staff. The wage and salary determination for classified staff follows the framework with Chester County Schools and is board approved. Policy 529, substitute compensation for classified staff. The substitute aides in this policy differ from substitute teacher aides. Classified staff include secretaries, custodians, maintenance, and cafeteria staff. The word annually, referring to when the pay rate is set, is being stricken from the guidelines paragraph. That's because if we can get a lower rate later in the year, we're going to do that. We're not just going to evaluate every year. Policy 530, overtime compensation time. This policy is in place to ensure compliance with applicable law and to ensure consistent treatment of all employees. Scheduling of overtime or compensatory time requires pre-approval from the employer's immediate supervisor. Compensatory time is tracked separately from vacation time. Policy 543, paid holidays for classified staff. Holidays are established for classified personnel in accordance with the district calendar and are included in the applicable employee handbook. No changes are suggested for this policy. And policy 808, food service. Nicole Malia has been working with the attorney on policy 808 in light of the changes in the legislation around lunch shaming. Guidelines have been added which address meal account procedures and meal charging. And the next policy committee meeting is scheduled to meet on Tuesday, April 3rd at 7:30 a.m. in the district office building. All are welcome to attend. So those are the policies that were discussed at the policy committee reading up for first reading. Unfortunately, we had a little snafu with other policies that were up, so we're putting another batch up for first reading and adoption tonight. That's under the advisement of our lawyers, and what happened was that we discussed them in the past. We haven't made any changes since then, but unfortunately, the wrong documents got uploaded, so we're going back, and I apologize. We've made some changes so this won't happen again. But this comes from August 21st, 2017, when these were revised. So nothing has changed since then. We just need to go through the formality of approving them again. There's also policies for second reading and adoption. And I did receive an email on one, and I just wanted to explain in case that person is listening, a little bit about that. It was about policy 328, administrator compensation. And basically, the person wanted to know why we were striking all the amount on evaluations. It's all being moved to a different policy. It's policy 313. So policy 313 deals with the evaluation of administrators, and it was last revised October 16th, 2017. So that language is literally moving. We also had a question on that same policy about this just doesn't make sense. You're using language which just doesn't seem right. And the reason why it doesn't seem right is because it's directly from school code. So if you look in Section 1164 of the Public School Code of 1947, specifically the PA statutes Title 24. So anybody following along, you're welcome to go to codes.findlaw.com, right there under Section C. And the phrase in contention was, we have something in there about meeting to meet in good faith, meet and discuss procedure. Well, this comes directly from the public school code, and the original source where the lawyers got this from, and I'll just read it just so people can understand that we're not trying to slip something in there. It's all legal stuff. Section C, it says, school employers, upon the written request of a majority of the school administrators in the district, shall be required to meet and discuss in good faith with the school administrators on administrator compensation prior to the adoption of the compensation plan. So with this, with Act 93 employees, it's not like a negotiation. You have to meet in good faith and have a discussed procedure. So it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's all a legal thing. So I didn't want anybody to think that we were dumbing down or making it so we're not evaluating administrators. That's completely not what we're doing. We're just trying to get compensation in one policy and evaluation in a separate one. And if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to have Dan speak on this, or lawyers can, chime in, but it's there. So there's lots of fun stuff going on in policy. If anyone wants to take it over next year, you let me know.
I have a question, and it's not related to what's in it's not related to a change in the policy. I'm just trying to understand one of the policies, and it's more for Chuck. 808 about food service, there's a lot of language in there around where the funds go that we receive, and it specifically talks about excess funds from the food service go to the child nutrition program. I recall that we also sell food to outside schools and make a profit, I believe, on that. Does that also have to go into the child nutrition program? So even if it's not from our school district, I'm just curious as to where those funds go. Can they help with other things?
Yeah, that's actually not from the school code, as Mrs. Gunderson was talking about. That's actually federal guidelines, so everything has to go in there. There's a limit on how much their reserves can be, and that coordinates with that. I believe 808 is going to be next year's update. It's pretty robust one. Dan, is that right? Next year's 800?
It's right now. It's right
it's
now.
on here now?
Yeah, that's why I just read it, so I was curious about the money
Where
part
am I
of it.
looking at 808? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
still in the second readings. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So even if it's from outside profit, it still
yes.
goes into this program,
Yes.
no matter if it's our kids or somebody else's?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And technically, the programs we do on outside are programs. So we have to actually comply with the program while selling to another program, because it's the same program. They're on the school lunch program.
Okay.
They're all on the school lunch program that we sell to.
Even if they're private schools, they're still in the school lunch program?
Well, it's mostly parochial schools that
Parochial, okay,
we're
so
dealing with. They are on the school lunch program.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
All the martyrs and saints are on the school lunch program.
Thanks for explaining that. Thanks for giving me the time to ask.
And if I can just suggest, the food service portion of the district it runs a little bit differently as far as how the money is structured and the whole budget thing. I know when I first came on the board, I actually sat with the lady that ran the program, Barb Missel, who was wonderful. And she actually took 2 hours and explained how everything worked, and it was really very
Did that.
educational.
Yeah, that was part of our orientation, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Facilities. Jen online to give us an update, or
No,
you're gonna do it?
she did her update last month. I'll just to go over the agenda items there.
Yep.
First, you have a generous donation from the high school boosters for a new baseball scoreboard. You notice it's attached there. The scoreboard cost about $10,000, but we have to get a special exception from the township. So if you go to the very end of that RFP there is a pledge from the boosters to pay for all of our fees, and other generous, very generous to pay for all the fees. The scoreboard right now, if you can think of the high school baseball stadium, is kind of hanging on the back of the press box. This would actually go into the outfield somewhere, to be determined depending on what the planning commission or wherever zoning board, I guess for the special exception, goes to. So that's on now. And I will say that unless anyone has some really tremendous issues with it, we would like to get the process started tomorrow. You will have to officially vote on it next week as an acceptance, but we'd like to get the kind of paperwork going so there's as little holdup as possible. We'll have to go to their meeting this month, and then the zoning meeting this month, and probably then to the supervisors for the stamp after the zoning does it. So.
Is there any concern from the community? I am not familiar with that field. I've never been to that field. Is it a concern for the neighbors in any way, or is it placed in such a way that doesn't bother anyone? I'm just curious if there'll be community reaction.
It's placed in such a way it won't bother anyone, but that's yet to be determined by the neighbors who.
So have they been involved? I just would hate for them to be surprised when it's going up, right? Are they aware? Are people aware of this?
They will be aware because we'll have to send us a notice out for this.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
The field's there.
The field's there.
The field's there. It's a board.
The field's
is bigger than
there.
a field.
The field's there and has been there before that neighborhood was built. How's that?
Okay. But a field doesn't block your view.
Yeah, it'll be facing the baseball field.
Okay.
I mean, facing home plate, which is down by the entrance of the football stadium. The football scoreboard, contrary, kind of faces their houses, but it's back. It's back at the end of the football stadium.
So they're going to donate it, and they're
Donate,
going to pay
install,
our
and
costs,
yeah,
and it's going to be
it's
no
awesome.
charge to us. I have no problem with it.
So, okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any? You're just making sure, no objections, just making sure. All right.
Okay, you have the results of the landscape bid. We had 4 bidders, Jim? 5 bidders, sorry. And we actually split this bid up into 3 parts. There's the mowing and lawn care portion, that's the biggest portion. So you see that there, it's recommended to go to M&M Landscaping. This is a new one. Currently, we have Coventry Landscaping. Natural turf maintenance, that's kind of like your lawn care, not your cutting, but and this is only done at the high school, middle school complex, as we have to have our grass fields kept up to PIAA standards. We cannot just have crabgrass and grubs all over. So we are recommending the award for that to natural turf maintenance. And there's a whole bunch of different things. It's a 3-year contract. And then we have additional services that we do with tree removal, bush trimming, mulching, things like that we're recommending goes to Charlestown Landscaping. The 5 bidders could bid on all or individuals, so we've selected out the best, or Jim and his crew have selected out the best price, and hopefully we'll have we had some issues with the lawn maintenance last year, kind of a little impact of some of the president's new immigration stuff. I'm trying to be kind saying that. So anyway, we're hoping for a much better this year. So that'll be on next week for award. Also, the roofing bid that we've been talking about, the major expenditure out of the capital reserve. This will expend pretty much almost all the capital reserve. There'll be very little left as the facilities, as Jen outlined last month at her report.
And over many years, she has outlined that.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
So the recommendation will be, the bid will be on for next week to Jotten Roofing, $3,132,899. There were four bidders, and basically that's the recommendation from our contractor. So, or our roofing consultant.
Chuck, I've got a question on that. A third-party company manages that bidding process for us, is that?
Yes.
And how does, so was there a prior approval for them doing that job? So I guess they're hired to look at these different roofing companies for us and do the RFP? I just want to understand how that works.
Actually, this is done through a national cooperative purchasing group. It's called U.S. Communities. And what they do is they vet bids through big places. So the roofing bid is a nationwide bid, which was the lead agency in that bid was Cobb County, Georgia. So they bid, and they have a piggyback put in their provision that meets all of our standards in Pennsylvania, and we were able to then piggyback onto that bid, and it allows them to vet, use prevailing wage. Everything is just the way as if we would have bid it, except we saved the cost of advertising and hiring our own architects and engineers to come in and do this.
So, because it looked like there was a roofing.
Roofing Resources.
Okay, so they do that. They're the ones who administer that.
They help kind of coordinate with the U.S. Communities bid. The actual roof product will be from a company called Garland. They actually hold the bid for the roofing contract for the country through this consortium.
All right, thanks for explaining that.
So that'll be on for approval. We would like to get that approved because we've got to mobilize that and get it all ready so that they're done. They got to start after school's out, and they have to finish before school starts. And they got to hopefully not stink up the building as much, although I think we're in a different area. Last time, 2 years ago when we did it, it was a pretty stinky proposition. It's the technical term.
All right, on that note, the building use report's there. And moving on to finance.
So last month, I guess, had many things you talked about in the budget, and I believe the superintendent, we narrowed it down to two main things we wanted to talk about tonight in the budget. One being the background on what the major increases in costs have been over the past, we went back 10 years, just to show you that. And also a detail, going to show you a detail of the intermediate unit budget. It'll be at the tail end of this. So we've done some of these things. You've heard us talk about some of these things before, but you may not have seen some of these things before as we get into the detail of the IU budget. So first thing is, we talked about our spending, and this is actually from back to 2009. It's as far back as we could go in our data analytics, and it basically shows the increase in spending from 2009 on a per pupil basis up to 2016. Does not have 2017 numbers in yet. The data analytic, they haven't uploaded. The state is a little behind. They wait till every single school district has their AFR uploaded, and from what I heard, there's still 3 unuploaded yet. So this goes to show you, we are purple there. I think it's purple. So we are high. We are higher. We know that. TE is second. We're just comparing with Unionville. It's operational cost only. It is not the debt. We've eliminated the debt and any major capital that's in there. That tends to skew people one way or another. If we showed the whole county with debt and capital, Phoenixville would be the highest per pupil by far. This is a chart that shows, it's a really hard chart to see because I probably should have eliminated some of the minor functions. A functional area is an area that the state refers to as a part of our budget. The largest area on the left is 1,100, and that is what we call regular instruction. So it's your K to 5 teachers, it's your social studies, math, language arts, science, music, art, phys ed, business ed, anything not special ed. 1,200 is the next one, that is special education. 1,300 is the vocational technical school. 1,400 is what they call other instructional services. It's very small, and it's mainly our little tiny summer school that we do, our homebound instruction that is provided. We have to provide students with homebound when they're hospitalized for certain things and stuff like that. The 2000 series are what we'll call support services, and that's anything from pupil services, psychologists, guidance counselors, nurses, the business office, the superintendent, the principals, the maintenance department, the transportation department, the technology department, and 2,900, which is the one you cannot see, is the IU core budget. So it's so low. 3,200 is our student activities. So over the past 10 years, we have 10 years of data here from the current estimated 2018 all the way back to the actual from 2009, year ending 2009. Over the past 10 years, our budget, operational budget, has increased just under 45%. So over 10 years, or about 4.5% a year. If you go to the special ed little bar, it's smaller, but just for fact and not it's increased over the past 10 years 106.2%, or a little over 10% a year. So this chart here shows just a comparison with us, TE and Unionville, for our spending change in special ed. And as you can see, like Dr. Wexler said earlier, I mean, our numbers are higher than percentage-wise than TE and Unionville. So we are going to be higher. So you can see the chart here, which shows the actual increase over time per pupil. This is a per pupil chart. I'll add that in. And it takes the total special ed budget and divides it by the total number of pupils. So it's not just special ed pupils, it's all the pupils. So it's 4,000 whatever from there. This is a bar chart that shows the actual dollar amount of the total 1,200 special ed accounts. So there are other numbers in special ed that aren't included in there, but for sake of comparison, it's the 1,200 function. So from 2009, we spent about $9 million, a little over $9 million in special ed total, that total account, and that function, in that function are not only our teachers and aides and our own staff, it's intermediate unit cost, it's cost to approve private schools, it's cost to other kinds of schools that we educate in. So 2009, it was $9 million. This current year, we are projecting it to be just north of 18.6 million. So that's the 106% increase.
Chuck, could you just go back one slide? I just have a question to make sure I understand that. So that's divided by the number of students. So it's about $1,000 difference between TE and us, looking at that chart. So when we're looking at our spending per student overall being higher than TE, already we can say $1,000 of that is specifically from special ed. Okay, that's I think an important thing to, at least for me to understand. Thanks.
No, that's right.
Yeah, that's a big piece.
I just want to clarify another point that was asked, and it's been asked each time we talk about the budget. Is it because the cost of services has gone up, or is it because we have more students identified? And the answer is yes and yes. So I just want to, we can't isolate and say it's because we have more students, or isolate and say it's because the cost of programs have gone up. Both have happened at the same time. And this is not a unique situation to Great Valley. As we move forward, you'll see that although we're disparate in comparison, the trend is universal.
So, okay. So we've increased 45% since 2009. But from 2008 to 2009, I think we cut our budget like how many millions of dollars? Didn't we?
No, that was 2009 to 2010. So it's all-
Okay, but
it's all-
even if you look at, okay, but it's the same argument. I'm gonna make the same argument a year later. I had the years wrong. So if you look at what we were at 2010, special, budget spending change, special education. So I guess where I'm really confused is how can you say that we increased 45% over the last 8 years when we actually took a giant step backward and cut how many millions of dollars going into that period?
The operational budget in 2009 was $62 million.
Right.
The operational budget projected for the end of this year is $90 million. That's the number. They're the numbers. I can't tell you the numbers.
I'm not disputing the math, you're 100% right. But what, in my mind though, that's to say, all right, so if we started at 2010 without making any cuts from the previous year, I would say absolutely right. This budget has increased 45% for both the reasons that Dr. Speaker Polubinsky just said. But when you start with the reduction, and since that time, we've actually built things in, so it's not a net increase of
Let's make it
45%, it's
clear,
only a net increase of the difference.
We only reduced our budget 1 year, and
Right.
it was very minor. It went from $76 million, $76,700,000 down to $76 million, period. From that year on, it continued to go up. That was back in 2010. It just continued to go up. So, you know, the numbers that you're referring to, that Al used to talk about, are the numbers that we deferred. I mean, people, we didn't replace. We had 16, 18 teachers retire in 2010. We didn't replace any of them, but we still had all the continuing programs. And when you see through the rest of these presentation, I think that you'll see what we're talking about. We still had increases in special ed then, okay? Back then, we had it. So for what we lost in that, we had increases in the IU cost. They started going up. I mean, I don't have a chart on that, but they pretty much went up more than our special ed cost. So, you know, if I did an analysis of inside the special ed budget, I think you would see there's two items driving it. It's not really, you know, our special ed people, the people that we have that are with the children every day. It's the IU, and they're with the children every day too. They're with different children, and it's our aides that Dr. Wexler had talked about. Those two items, if you pull them out of the special ed cost, yeah, has special ed going up with them out? Absolutely. But the dramatic increase has been through our intermediate unit cost and through our cost for these personal care aides that are being talked about. So let me finish this. I think some
Well, real
stuff-
quick too, the gap there in that slide is also because the growing gap is, some of that is also related to the fact that we have a higher percentage of identified.
I think that's why
children.
Dr. Speaker Polubinsky said yes to both questions.
Right, exactly, yeah, I just want to make sure
So,
everybody's clear on that one, exactly.
Yeah. So now here's just, if you just take out the special ed component of the budget, you see how the gap gets a little closer, and our per pupil cost is only a little bit different in operational. So this is a chart that shows from 2009 to 2016, shows that our operational budget change if we pull out that 1,200 function, the special ed function, just to show you. This is just numbers. I'm not trying to sensationalize anything. That's not my job to sensationalize. I'm just trying to give you an understanding of the numbers.
And I think to speak to your point, I believe Samantha had shared that this does exactly what you were talking about, once you pull out the special education.
So now, just to show you on the other side, we have been going up a little higher than TE in Unionville, just a smidge. If this is just the regular ed account, so this is just that 1,100 functions. So this is just our reading, writing, arithmetic, so to speak. You know, no special ed, no guidance counselors, no nurses, no psychologists, no any of those things in there. This is just our regular teachers from kindergarten through 12th grade that aren't special ed. So this includes them. And you see, we do have while the gap isn't as big as it was in the one where they're combined, it's still larger. We have more, and that goes back to the fact of the charts we showed before. We do have a higher or a lower student to teacher ratio in Great Valley, and we do have the highest paid teachers in the county. Now, this is the support services, and I just show this. This is that entire 2000 series. So this is everybody that doesn't. This is everybody else other than people that teach. So if you see from this chart, we actually are behind TE. They actually exceeded our growth pace in this because they are the blue one and they are a little bit above us. It's close. I wouldn't call it. It's not material. We're all the same. So other than regular ed and special ed, we are virtually the same here. In fact, you know, I could say that we're actually doing a little better than them, and you can see Unionville is just barely underneath us. That green is just peeking out from below the purple. Now this is another chart which affects all of us in addition to special ed, you know, and it's not all special ed's fault. But this is a chart that shows the increase in pension expense. So you can see how that goes way up. Now that ties right in. So our pension expense in 2009 was less than $500 a pupil. It was actually closer to $400 a pupil. You know, now we are closing in on $2,500 a pupil. The pension cost in over 10 years, and this chart shown here actually just shows 8 of those years, but the pension cost over 10 years has gone up just under 700% since 2009. We're about 70% a year. Now.
And this is not something that we, as a board, are like, yay, we want to pay this. This is something that the state says, you owe this much.
This goes back.
I'm just putting it out there because this is easily misunderstood that, you know, the crazy board is approving 700% increases and blah, blah, blah.
It is a percentage. So.
Now this is kind of the I think it's the final chart I have before I get into some other stuff here. This chart here shows this is the total operating budget. Now from this chart, we've removed the special ed cost because it's a high cost, and we've removed the pension cost because it's another high cost. So you can see when you take those two costs out, we are all virtually the same, us, Unionville, and TE, and we all have virtually not increased our budget. We've only increased our budget since, and again, it's only 8 years shown, but there's 10 years of data I have behind here for the yellow thing. The total budget without special ed or pension in it has increased a combined 13.2% between 2018 and 2009 and 2018, or about 1.3% a year. So, I mean, you really are handcuffed with special ed and pension. You do have the ability to you know, not hire teachers, although I would argue that in special ed, you don't have that ability. You have the ability to eliminate other staff and do some minor damage to your pension cost or minor reductions to your pension cost, but you know, I will tell you that's not going to make a big impact on that too much. So this was just an attempt to kind of, here it is. Now, if you look at a 10-year trend for this, really, if pension was staying the same and until 2001, when the governor monkey wrenched the pension program, we were on a kind of flat line. Everybody was paying, and again, there's some actuarial data that was provided to, if the legislatures hadn't played with this, the extra money they got in 2001 by reducing the pension costs because they were fully funded, if they had kept it at a level, even just the same as the employees were paying, which was 6.5% to 7.5%. Instead, they drove it down to 1% for a few years, and then all of a sudden, then they gave a big increase to all the workers because of a deal that Ridge had cut with the PSEA, and big increase to all the workers. Little downturn in the economy back in the early 2000s, if you remember. So they lost money, they weren't getting money put in. Now, combined, the new actuarial data is showing that the effects of the reductions in staff from 2009 through about 2013 are having a tremendously negative effect. Your rates are going to go higher than what they've been showing because you don't have people funding the people that are in the system for life or that have been in the system. So there's nobody funding. It's kind of like the same thing as Social Security. You have less people funding Social Security, there's not going to be as much Social Security left. So, yeah, it's okay.
Except the state can't print money.
The state can't print money to, yeah, they're right, the feds can. Okay.
And I really did look at this before I came here, but this is really a great way to look at this because it's really putting it in perspective. So when people talk about, our budget's gone up over 6% a year for the last 10 years, that's just based on math. So you take the total number, and when you do the math, you're going to get some exorbitant amount of money. But when you actually look at what's controlling the increase, and you take out the things that we don't control, and you take out the mandates having to do with the things we don't control, the reality is our budget has gone up 1.3% per year, and we've gone from, I don't know what, to last year's rank of 10th. I say this is great perspective, and I appreciate having it this way. And I know a lot of our constituents will also. Thanks.
Okay, the next several slides, and I'm going to profess to not knowing a lot of devils behind these details because as the bean counter number cruncher put the numbers in the places they're supposed to be, I just take what they tell me and budget it. So, and then I try and, because as Joanna said earlier, stuff happens, and then you have a couple kids move in, all of a sudden they're going to a special school and it's $150,000 each, and we didn't have that money, so the next slide, this slide here is starting, I'm going to, the next 3 or 4 slides, probably 3 slides, are the details of what the IU gives us as a budget. So we've tried to bold the numbers here, and I may have missed any. If I missed any, I apologize. Anything bolded is kind of tied at the hips to special ed. So you can see, Joanna talked about the advanced clinical services. We pay for that. They're telling us to budget $237,000 next year. BVA is the virtual academy. We have various and sundry students going to that. A much cheaper alternative than a charter school. I'll just highlight some. If you have, I know this is a lot to digest. So.
For the programs of Reach and Teach, you'll see on the next slide, they're programs that are run by the intermediate unit for specific, for students with specific disabilities, mental health issues, or autism. And I just want to make it very clear that many of these programs are intensive and strategically aligned to a student's specific needs. We cannot, nor should we try to, replicate some of these programs within our school. In some cases, these programs are the least restrictive environment based upon what the student needs. A lot of work is done at the front end by Dr. Wexler and her team in matching students' needs with the appropriate programs. So some of the programs you'll see up there are actually residential programs for students whose needs are such that they need to live at the place in which they're educated. The Discover program is actually like a job coach situation. So a lot of the programs have been tailored based upon the needs of students, and they are very high quality and incredibly effective.
And most of these are for our most needy students. So, and again, you can ask questions on these later, next week, whenever you want. Email us. I just tried, and I actually, believe it or not, summarize these. The budget they give us is, I think it's 14 pages long with a lot of stuff. So the special ed at the CDC, that's the Child Development Center, that would be our most needy students. That's, I don't even know how many students that is. It's probably only a couple there. That's, don't guess if you don't know. I cross district, we have students that go to other school districts that run an IU class, and that's that. I can tell you that. And basically, a lot of the other things on there are for students going to some of these other programs. Correct? Yeah, so like the hearing or all these itinerant services, things like that. So, and then here's, there's a lot of things. CDC market value share, there's a thing in what's called the Articles of Agreement that basically states that we will pay a market share of the operation and maintenance costs of the Child Development Center. And unfortunately for us, because based on our market value, basically us and TE pay the most in the county. Because our market value is so much higher, they just do that. It's based on the value of all the land and improvements in your district. TCHS is the technical college, the tech school. So there's some components of TCHS that there's one that's special. You see there's special ed costs, so that's added to the TCHS. The 900,000 is the strict like tuition, what you would think of, the technical education that they're getting. Special ed would be any students with IEPs and over there that are getting specialized services on top of that. We've talked about the academic part of TCHS. We are working with the high school. We should have that down to almost zero, we're hoping, for next year. We are working on scheduling now, and that's going to happen. The technical, the AVTS is a reimbursement. That's kind of a pass-through. We get a revenue for the tech school renovation, like we have revenue for our renovations from way back, and we reimburse it to the IU. The state will only pay us, so we have to receive it as revenue, the state tells us. So I have to inflate our budget, not a lot, but I have to inflate our budget to pay the IU back for that. And then there's some other things on there. There's Teach, you talked about Teach, and one of the other faster growing areas in not only the IU budget, but our own budget, we have a line item for translation services. As you know, what Joanna alluded to was our ELL population, but it's really growing. I mean, that's another segment. While it's not 766 students, it has virtually doubled or tripled in the past recent years. And there's
Well, the problem there too is it's not one language, right? It's getting broader, not taller. Is that the right way to describe it?
yeah. So a couple. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I just wanted to ask, when it's written translations, where do those happen? I mean, in business, I know a lot of that is sent offshore when it's not, when it's written, it can be done overnight. Obviously, if it's someone verbally interpreting, that's a different thing. But are we paying local people, or does IU pay local people, or do they offshore it to cheaper places?
It's both.
Okay.
And it's not only the written, much of it is actual translation.
Right, so that's, yeah, that you can't
Right.
do
I mean,
separately. Maybe you could, but.
we actually even have to, we translate all our registration materials. I can just tell you what my department does. We can translate registration materials. Sometimes when our Mrs. Garrison, our registration person, has a person that needs, we have a language line that we call, and they're on a conference phone call, and they talk to the conference phone tells us, we talk to the conference, so it's,
Yeah, I just, for the written, I would encourage it wherever possible, if there's possibilities to send those things to translators who aren't living here, who might be less
couple
costly.
things we're gonna do, and you'll see coming up soon, is we do have an RFP on the street for aid services, because we're looking to, we found out that the place we were with may be a little high, so we're gonna do an RFP to see if that's true and see what the pricing could be. That, when we're spending $3 million on aids, even a 10% decrease is a big decrease. The other thing we're gonna do, it's next on our bucket list for this year, is to do an RFP for translation services. We've been using two. One was secured by the intermediate unit through an RFP, and one was secured through this national co-op I was talking about, U.S. Communities. I'm not sure we're getting the best price, so our purchasing person is working on that. Because combined between the translation at the IU and the translation we're doing in-house, it's closing in on $500,000 total. So, okay, that's.
All right, thanks. Any other questions on the budget? All right, you want to run through these other
Yeah,
items?
let me get there. Okay, we had the other one in facilities, the donation, because it's going to require, or if it was just a straight donation, we would put there, we had a person donate yoga mats to the football team for approval. You have a contract for a student at Pathway School. It's a private school. And then you have some professional development training agreements for Singapore math with teachers. That's coming out of Title I and Title II money for the elementary schools. And then you have your year-to-date spending report there. And
All right. All right,
just to kind of go back to budget again, is there anything else you guys want the superintendent and I to bring back as we continue to work? We're in the middle of a staffing right now to try and drill down some things. We're in the middle of seeing who's going to retire,
Can I make a request just for information about something really small, and if the rest of the board doesn't want it, I'm happy to move on. I'm at the high school, there's a policeman who helps direct traffic after school, I'm sure. I don't know about the morning. Have you ever looked into like getting a traffic light or something? Like just,
We've looked into it in ad nauseum. It's a PennDOT issue. We don't have enough traffic there. And we don't have enough accidents. Yeah, and really there's.
we pay for the,
We offered to pay.
we offered to
Absolutely.
pay, so we're not paying.
Oh, we pay for the
We pay.
traffic guy.
That's what I'm just,
When we started out, when the middle school opened in 2000, we actually had a crossing guard at each entrance, morning and afternoon. I mean, that was costing us upwards of about $180,000 a year. So we took it down to one traffic person in the afternoon at the exit where the buses get out. That's our biggest concern. We did that was before your time even. Yeah, I mean, it was before Dan, because it was just really just.
and we can't go back to them and ask for a reevaluation. Like there's a lot of traffic during those times, and it seems like there's a lot of other places that have gotten lights and special treatment. And I mean, I just think that if we could make it safer for the students, I think it's worth looking at, because if we're just paying this year after year after year, and it's a problem that we could solve by better infrastructure.
That's why we tried to offer to do a light. We would still need a policeman to work the light every day, and that would cost you the same money, because the light would be on a trip, and we would want the policeman to, when they work a traffic light somewhere for you, to open it up. He basically stops traffic both ways when it's time for the buses to go out, and every bus that's ready to go gets let out, either right or left, in the afternoon.
I just feel
Mary,
like there must be a better way.
Could
There-
I
there
make
has
a
to be better way.
suggestion?
I mean, we don't need to talk about this now, but in the
We could give it
future,
to Jen and the Facilities Committee next month.
Mary, Dwayne Milne has somebody in, yeah, Mary. Dwayne Milne has a PennDOT representative in his office. You might want to, that might be a way to put him and Chuck together. That might be a way to go.
and I didn't want to like hijack this. I feel bad, like, because, you know, I spoke last meeting, like, let's not have one person say what we want to do, but it was asked to me, like, when I ran for board, I remember being like hit with this question of what do you think about the policeman? And I was kind of like, you know, I haven't been to the high school, I don't know about the policeman, and 6 years later, he's still there, and I'm there now too, with one of my kids at preschool.
I think-
So I'm like, okay, finally, like, let's talk about this.
All of us who have lived through the middle school and high school pickups and drop-offs can attest that anything could help because it is chaos.
Even like another traffic study to determine, like, can the cars go out one direction or can we use that back entrance or something? Like, there has to be a better way to do this, because what we're doing now, like, there has to be a better way. I don't know what it is, not a traffic expert, but give me a broken bone, I'm fine with that, but.
I'll call Milne's office and say, we'll take care of it.
And she had a comment too.
Yeah, just, we've been back and forth, obviously, on different aspects of the budget. And one thing that came up last month and the month before was the additional staff needed for student services. So Joanna proposed something, and then last month she came back and said, okay, we could do it with less. I'm just curious as to where you are in the current draft of the budget. Are you with her original number or with the lowered number right now?
What you noticed, what we saw was the psychologist looking at a coordinator of that, and then realigning, and I've spoken to Dr. O'Toole, and he's working with teaching and learning to see if we can realign with existing staff, the 1.0 for the reading support at the secondary level. That is a much more likely, the ability for us to realign for that position is much more likely than realigning for a psychologist position. It's just a much more specialized certificated need. So that's what we're looking at doing now.
So it's going to be somewhere in the middle of what we saw the first time and the
Exactly.
second time, because I just want to make
It's
sure we're
down
supporting
one.
this. Okay,
It's definitely down one, it's just which one it's down.
okay, thank you.
And that was taken out when we went from 106.1 to 105.7.
I'll just put in a thank you. I know that we threw a lot at you and that a lot of time went into preparing this, so thanks for investing your time for us.
All right. Any other items?
Can you just repeat the last day of school so we can all hear it?
You mean if it doesn't snow tonight?
So our snow makeup days, contrary to some of the information that I've been receiving, the snow makeup days are added to the end of the school year. So we still have 3 additional days before we hit spring break. So currently, our last graduation remains the same. So our seniors did not have to make up this last day, barring additional days. So graduation is June 8th. And our last student day is now Monday, June 11th. The teachers their days keep pushing toward the end of the year.
And I know a lot of seniors that hope it snows a lot more.
I think we've had enough.
All right, there is the draft agenda for next week, also listed there. Oops, I forgot. Any committee reports that I missed? All right, sorry. The draft agenda is there for a review for next week. At this point, I will open up the microphone for public comment. If you come to the podium, state your name, residency, and please try to limit your time to 3 minutes so others can speak. I just want to remind everybody it's a comment section, not a question and answer.
Thank you. Bruce Chambers, 17 James Thomas Road. Talk to you about the budget again. I'd like to thank the board for discussing the IU budget. I'm glad to see there's some pushback on that, and I appreciate that very much. I also greatly appreciate the presentation by Dr. Wexler with the superintendent's input. I think the public expects a good special ed program, but they also expect it to be managed well for cost, and it seems like steps are being taken to do that, so I appreciate that very much. I wanted to remind the board of some figures here. Some figures have been bandied about here, which I could have a war of graphs with Mr. Linderman, but I don't have enough time for that. But I would just remind them of things. The budgets presented by the school district have not been correct in the last several years. The so-called shortages that were supposed to occur never occur. The millions that were supposed to be put into that are not used, and it remains in your reserves. You currently have over $20 million worth of reserves. Actually, this year's budget increase is not the 5.7 million, it's actually almost 10 million, because what you're doing is you're converting 4.2 million of the capital budget to funds that of the debt, for the debt, and you're converting it into the capital budget. So you're taking money out, so you're actually increasing the expectation therefore by $10 million. There has been a 39% increase over the last 6 years. If you approve this budget, I don't know where the 1.3% per year comes from. It's 39% over the last 6 years. You're spending $24K per student. If you get this, if you approve this budget, it's going to be $25K. You've acknowledged that you have the highest teacher contract in the county and that you have the lowest student-teacher ratio in the county. And I would say to all of that, what have we gotten for that? Have the results improved? I haven't seen them. We just keep asking for more money, but what are the results? How has the school district improved? What are we getting for that money? I'd also remind you that the differences between the districts are significant. I'll run over those numbers again. If we spent the same per student as TE, you could save 16 million, Unionville 12 million, Westchester 16 million, Downingtown 28 million, OJR 20 million, and if you included the other ones on that chart up there, you'd see the differences between the districts are extreme. I appreciate the fact that you're comparing yourselves with Unionville and TE because that's the ones I brought up originally for performance-wise, that we're behind them, but yet we're spending more than them. But we're spending a lot more than everybody else. And then lastly, we talk about a lot of costs, but I would also like to remind you of something I sent you an email about. Back in 2015, myself and others asked the board not to approve the teachers' extension of their contract out of concern for the cost. And I'll be done in a minute. Thank you. We looked at the cost, and it was extremely high. And we know the teacher's contract drives all your personnel costs. Your personnel costs are 70 to 75% of your budget. So we were concerned about that. You approved it. You went ahead. Afterwards, and looking at the budget, I became very concerned about it. I met with the superintendent and Mr. Linderman and expressed my concern. After it was put in place, I looked at the cost, and it was extreme. And I asked Mr. Barrett, why was that? How could that have happened? And his response was that the contract was fiscally sustainable over the long haul. It was going to be staying within the Act 1 index. And the terms of the contract clearly keep it within the index, and that the salaries and benefits are in line with the goal, which took into account the budget and cost implications. Well, as I said in my email to the board, your salaries and benefits have gone up over 16% in 2 years because of that contract. That's $10 million. That's an extreme miss from what you had said it was going to be. If you take the Act 1 index cost, it should have been 4.9, 4.8%. It's something like 16.8%. So I would ask you, what have we gotten for that? And where is he accountable for that huge miss in the calculations? That's gigantic. It's startling. And I would say, who's accountable for that? What accountability has been placed upon that? And I would ask you not to place the accountability for that on the taxpayers who are going to have to fund the next budget. We deserve a tax cut. I'm surprised that you're still talking about raising taxes. I really am, based upon what has happened in the past 6 years or so. So I would appreciate your attention to that and give serious consideration when you sit there and have to make a decision about raising taxes. Thank you.
Bill Dwyer, 10 Stewart Drive, East Whiteland. I'd like to tell you, first of all, I was here for the meeting on February 12th. I walked out of the meeting on February 20th, which I thought was an absolute fiasco. It's the worst meeting I've ever seen in my more than 30 years of coming here. I walked out at about 9:30, but I watched the rest of it on YouTube this afternoon. So I got a couple things I'd like to talk to you about. Number one, on February 12th, the school board asked the school superintendent to come back with two projections. Number one, cutting the budget by $1 million. Number two, cutting the budget by $2 million. The school superintendent came back on February 20th with no suggestions, basically said, here's the budget, live with it. That's basically what she said to all of you. And I think the only way you're going to get her to make any changes is for you to give her a dollar amount and tell her that's what the budget is. You're going from $99 million this previous year to $106 million. That's 6+% this year. And I don't see, as Bruce has talked about, I don't see the need for it. Secondly, on the meeting on February 20th, there was a short discussion about class sizes. And the school superintendent reminded everyone that the guidelines were put in place in 1998. They haven't been changed since then. That's 20 years. Think about all of the changes that have taken place in the rest of your life, but we have the same class guidelines that we had 20 years ago. The superintendent recommended not making any changes. I would, again, remind you about the new programs that have been put in place and so on in the last 20 years. When asked about the cost savings, the superintendent said, and I quote her here, "With every change comes consequences," end quote. She also said she doesn't believe that any increase in the class size would result in cost savings because, according to her, it will end up with more students needing additional aid. How can you possibly know that if you haven't seen it? I don't understand how you can come to that kind of a conclusion. And quite honestly, once she made the suggestions about the class sizes, that was the end of your discussion with her. There's two questions I have for you. Number one, if we're averaging 1.3% increase over the last 10 years, why do we need 6+% this year? It's not 1.3%, so don't get locked in on that. And the second question I have is, and I know people here meet with people in other school districts and so on. I'm wondering why our special ed costs are so high compared to TE and Unionville. There's probably a reason. It would be interesting to know what the difference is. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other public comments. Any other comments from the board? All right, the board met in executive session on March 1st for some personnel issues. And we met before this meeting for some personnel and legal issues. We're not meeting afterwards, thankfully. At this point, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much for coming. We'll see you next week.